G'day guys, timer is on, happy running. Run for me as I cannot while I am now pretty injured. Going to be sussing out exactly what's going on with my leg today, but fingers are crossed. So yesterday I did say I was going to talk about footwear selection because footwear selection was one of the main factors that ended up leading to my injury because I chose the wrong shoes for the activity I was doing, but then I ended up talking about acute injuries, and hopefully that was helpful. But today I will talk about the shoe selection, and just be really clear, I have done an episode on NFT sneaker selection, so STEPN like specific to walkers, joggers, runners, and trainers. But today I'm talking about shoes that you wear on your actual feet. So this is a really big topic, and I'm going to try and keep it as like succinct and sort of big overview as possible because there are so many variations and subtypes and like specifics when it comes to footwear that all of the glossy like ads from the running shoes I'm sure will sort of show you. So I want to sort of talk big picture about the factors. So again, and as well, like I am interested in shoes, but I'm not a podiatrist. It's not my sort of main job. So I'm going to give a sort of big overview, but if you do want to know more about it, then probably best to do your own research. Or I do have one of my the people I work professionally with and also do some treatments for is one of the top runners in the country, running a 2-hour 14 marathon. He's a podiatrist with a he's just amazing at running and also his job, and he does have a shoe podcast which I could link if people are really interested. So to sort of go big picture, the first, I guess, a bit of a backstory. The reason why I said the shoe selection was such a big part of my injury yesterday, where I slipped over and twisted my knee and ankle, was that choosing the surface is the big one to that is the first two big categories. So that's going to be either your running shoes or your trail shoes. There are other shoes that I'm going to not cover, like track shoes and sprinting, racing flats, that style of thing, because I think that's not as relevant for what we're talking about. So the big picture ones that to think about are the runners and trail shoes. So I'm going to mostly focus on the runners because that's what most people will be doing. But certainly if you are running on soft surfaces, trails, anything like that, looking into trail shoe options could be a good option. However, be aware, I was wearing trail shoes last night, which had fairly plasticky little stud cleats things on them, like pretty like small, but harder than your a harder surface than your regular running shoes with a grippy sort of rubber, and it was that like slipping on a really wet and kind of mossy driveway in those shoes that end up leading to me slipping over, twisting my knee and my ankle. So be really careful with your shoe selection around the surface. And if you are, lesson learnt, if you're running, I was wearing those partly because we're doing part trail in my run club that evening, but also they're just really comfortable shoes and I love them. But yeah, I should have been, and the other factor was just how drenched my runners were from the triathlon I did in the weekend. So like a series of factors that just led to a wrong decision and then an unlucky circumstance. Anyway, to get back on topic, trail shoes are great, and the main difference about them to most runners is going to be the grip on the bottom of the shoe. So whether it is sort of stud-like, and depending on what type of trail you're running, if it is really gnarly trail, then compared to a fire trail, which is more like sort of a gravel road, if it's looks more like asphalt, make it more like a runner. And if it is, running through mud and dirt, then certainly go more on the stud side of things. But in terms of like the shoe architecture, so it's going to be the amount of like foamy cushioning, the amount of rigidity through the shoe, the amount of medial arch support, and then the uppers. A lot of that is pretty similar between the trail runners and your regular running shoes, except the one sometimes with the uppers you can get ones that are like mega drainage for your trail runs because they're assuming you're going to be running through some puddles and whatnot. So I'm going to then now focus particularly on the runners and take those factors that I talked about across to your ideal trail shoe. So the thickness of the sole is going to be one of the big factors in the material it's made out of. So that's the cushioning side of things, and you can get super high cushioning style shoes. So if you think about each sort of one of these factors as having like 3 tiers, so you kind of like baseline, regular, your high level, and then low level. When you're looking at cushioning, this might be appropriate for people who have had sort of, bony stress challenges before, find running really uncomfortable, generally on the heavier weight side of things. They might go for a really high cushioning shoe. And so there are your kind of conventional, excuse me, well, I just have, I thought I was going to sneeze. No, okay. So the cushioning in the form of in the heel, like that can be really thick, like your Hokas, Hoka, are a popular brand that have been doing very thick soled shoes. And then you look at kind of more your base, like regular type, that will be most running shoes that you would have come across. And then if you go down to the minimal footwear side of things, like your Merrells or your even like to the very extremes of your 5-finger sort of toe shoes, you can see that there's going to be a gradient of how much cushioning there is. So again, with like deciding what's appropriate for you, I imagine most people will sort of be in that middle ground base level. But if you have had particular issues with bony stress stuff, and you've or maybe you're on the heavier side of things, or you just find running really uncomfortable, want to try something different, then certainly the high level cushioning ones can be good. But if you are really interested and you've done a lot of barefoot stuff before, like maybe you played a barefoot sport on the beach, like beach volleyball, and you spend a lot of time barefoot and you do beach runs or something like that, then you might consider looking at the more minimal side of things. The like minimal footwear got a real really popular with Born to Run coming out, I think it was 2011, and that got people like really into the idea that you can train your feet, which is totally true. I've done it. I think I talked about it in the podcast previously, but it is a big stress on your feet. And if you're not used to it, it is really hard. And just to, if you don't make it to the end of the episode, the big takeaway is like, if you are going to change any type of factor in your shoes, just make sure you do it gradually and you don't go from one extreme to the other. So going from Hokas to down to like barefoot running, that will cause a lot of stress and just a big change of, your body adapts to what you spend your time doing. It'll be very different to what you usually do and likely cause injuries. So go for gradual changes and potentially even like doing some runs in one shoe and some without the other. Anyway, so I'll go back to the cushioning side of things. So that's the first factor to think about. The next is going to be about, probably a good one to be aware of is how much drop your shoe has. So what that is basically higher on the heel versus if it's higher on the heel than it is on at the toes. So like you're wearing a high heel shoe is the most extreme example of this, where your heel is much higher. You're almost walking on your tiptoes. So if you're at all elevated at the heel, then that's going to be a higher drop shoe, and going down to straight flat, there's going to be a gradient of basically how many millimeters of drop there is. So reasons why you might have a high drop shoe is if you wanted to, if you're having ankle challenges and you want to unload your Achilles a little bit, then wearing high drop shoes, so maybe like 6 to even up to 10 mil, to deload your Achilles a little bit, that can be quite helpful. And that's actually what I was doing, wearing those large trail shoes, because my Achilles has been a bit flared up just recently. So I was making that shoe selection to try and help my Achilles, and in turn end up really hurting my whole right leg. So there you go. But yeah, so basically you can go kind of the higher end drop, but the thing to realize is that anytime you're changing something, you're also changing something else. And the more you're on your heels elevated, the more you sort of start to transfer that stress through to another part of the body, and that's going to be your anterior knee usually. So when I did start running with a lot of high drop, when I was going really high drop with my marathon training, I started to get a niggly left knee. So there's always going to be a trade-off. And again, it's all about changing things gradually and being smart about that kind of macro loading side of things as well. So then we're looking at, so we've got cushioning, the amount of drop, then kind of rigidity, I think, is the next factor. So there's probably best to talk about it as a stability. Here's the time, and that's 10 minutes. So kind of your old school runners are, I think there was a real push towards making everything super stable and providing lots of medial arch support. So medial being the inside of your foot. So the idea that that flat feet are bad, and you should always have your feet slightly elevated if you're flat foot and elevated from the inside. This is something that has gone through some different schools of thought, and as you can imagine, with the gradient of cushioning going down to barefoot running, the medial arch support is also something that has gone through some pretty big swings of people either loving it or hating it. So again, you can go for shoes like the Brooks Beast or the IRL, are like the mega medial arch support side of things, and as the top of the top of support, and then going down to sort of more your regular neutral. When you look at shoes, they're often called like anti-pronation shoes and so pronation is something that people, I don't know, almost freak out about, like, oh, I have flat feet and I pronate. Like your body, when you're running, if you look at a foot graph of the points of contact of the foot, like you're meant to go through a level of like from the back of your foot through your midfoot. You're starting sort of fairly lateral, and then you go into some amount of pronation to then push off your big toe. So I think pronation is just one of those words that have been like weaponized by old school podiatrists to get you into orthotics. But yeah, some amount of pronation is necessary. And I'm not saying that orthotics are bad. They're useful tools to try and facilitate changes. But again, with all of these things, like it's all about just gradually changing between and seeing how it feels. So yeah, if you're on the high end pronation, really, really flat feet, and you haven't got intrinsic foot strength, so that your muscles of your feet are not strong, then having some medial arch support can be useful. But again, it is something that you, for most cases, can sort of train your way out of if that's something you want to do. Because when you look at adding more support, adding more structure to the shoe, basically, it increases weight. And if you're really looking for performance, that increased weight can be detrimental. But I imagine most people are pretty happy with just something that they can consistently maintain. So use that accordingly. The last thing to kind of, I guess the uppers are important. So there's, and this is probably a good time to talk about, there's some, I think trainers have become really trendy recently. And there are so many running, like trainers that masquerade, they kind of look like they're runners, but I think it's really key to understand that like a Yeezy kind of dress shoe or a lot of those dress shoes out there, like they're not made with running in mind. They're made to look good. And so I think it's really key to sort of make sure when you are choosing a shoe that you're not going for like a dress shoe that looks like a runner. You're going for one that is designed for running. So maybe have a look at your feet, look at what you're wearing, and make sure it is from like a line from that brand that is specifically for like running, performance, or training. Because there's so many shoes now that look like runners that would really not do well for most people, and would likely just break really quickly because they're not made with reinforcements in mind. I won't cover the uppers too much, but basically, like one of the big things is in a lot of trainers, they're not at all like reinforced in the areas that these are dress trainers, in areas that put under stress while running. So you just want to make sure you are definitely wearing a runner that is designed accordingly, and they're not like leather on top or anything where it's going to be really stiff and overly warm. And the last thing to briefly touch on is the new super shoes. So you've got the carbon plate through the actual sole of the shoe. That is something that's all very new and is causing a lot of arguments as whether it's legitimate to have record standing when they're broken with these carbon plates. So basically the idea is that the stiffness of the carbon plate gives extra propulsion and kind of force transfer to improve running performance. But they're definitely shoes that I haven't personally used them, but they can be useful in injury prevention and management if you do have like an arthritic big toe and you want to take some of that loading off the forefoot. And there are a few other conditions like metatarsal plate injuries where taking some of that stress off the forefoot can be good. So it can be used instead of an injury prevention side of things, but they're really pricey, and they can, like, they're such a different style of shoe that getting used to them, you've still got to follow all of the regular, all the advice I've given about gradually changing between things and not just going from one extreme to the other. So a bit of a long one today, but hopefully that was useful. If you do have any follow-up questions about shoes, do let me know. And otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow.